This isn't a shelter, and we don't do walk-ins off the street, the manager said coldly, eyeing the man and child like they were dirt on the marble floor. You think just wearing a t-shirt and dragging in some little girl gets you a penthouse suite? She scoffed, then leaned across the counter. People like you don't belong here. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments. And if this story moves you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Stories like this deserve to be seen and remembered. Now, let's take you inside the Azure Haven Hotel, a brand new luxury property right on Biscayne Boulevard in Miami. It's 1 p.m. on a blazing July afternoon. Sunlight cuts through the glass doors, dancing off polished marble floors and crystal chandeliers. The air inside is crisp and perfumed, the kind of setting where money and privilege whisper from every corner. And stepping into that space, James Carter, a tall black man in a plain white t-shirt and khaki shorts, walked in hand with his 9-year-old daughter, Zoe, dressed in a pink t-shirt, her tiny jean shorts creased from the car ride, curly hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. They looked, to the staff at least, like they didn't belong, but what no one knew, what the front desk clerks didn't pause long enough to even ask, was that James wasn't just any man off the street. He was the owner, the CEO of the entire Azure Hospitality Group, worth over $10 billion, the one who approved the architecture, the lighting, even the scent used in the lobby. But today, none of that mattered. Not to the staff. Not in this moment. James had come here undercover, responding personally to troubling reports on travel forums, anonymous stories of black guests being mistreated, talked down to, turned away. He didn't send a team. He didn't announce his arrival. He brought his daughter and tried to book a 3-day, 2-night VIP stay at his own hotel. No red carpet, just honesty. And from the moment he walked in, the judgment hit hard and fast. Linda Harper, the manager on duty, didn't even let him finish his sentence before shutting him down. You don't have a reservation? That's not how it works here. This isn't some roadside motel, she said, her voice sweetly condescending. Then came Michael Chen, a front desk clerk, who took one glance at James's black titanium card, scoffed, and threw it on the floor, letting it land by James's sneakers. Nice try, he said. These knockoffs get bolder every year. Zoe bent down to pick it up, but James stopped her. He picked it up himself, slowly, silently, his jaw tight. His daughter looked up at him, tears already brimming in her eyes. Daddy, she whispered, why are they so mean? He didn't answer. Not yet. He just stood there, fists clenched, heart racing, staring at people he paid, in a lobby he built, being treated like a stranger in his own house. Nearby, a guest, Evan Wright, a white travel blogger in his 30s, watched the scene unfold. He pulled out his phone and quietly began recording. Moments later, he tapped post on a short clip and wrote just 3 words, Racism at Azure Haven. He uploaded it to X. The video began spreading before the confrontation had even ended. Next to Michael, another clerk, Sarah Brooks, joined in with a smirk. We get these kinds of scams all the time, she said loudly enough for guests behind them to hear. They stroll in, try to act important, and expect free upgrades. Bet they Googled the hotel this morning. Then, under her breath but still audible, she added, they should try somewhere more appropriate, like one of those places off 79th. It was a jab drenched in microaggression, the kind James had endured too many times in too many places. But hearing it said in front of his child made something in him shift. Intern concierge Layla Morgan, just 22, stood behind the counter, visibly uncomfortable. She leaned forward and spoke to Linda in a hushed voice. I think that's a real card. And this man. Something's not right here. Linda didn't bother looking at her. Stay in your lane, intern, she snapped, You don't get to decide who we serve. By now, more guests were watching. Some whispered. A few turned their phones toward the scene. The tension in the lobby thickened. Then Thomas Reed, the hotel security guard, came over at Linda's signal. You need to leave, he said to James. You're making people uncomfortable. Zoe pulled closer to her father. Daddy, I'm scared, she whispered. James inhaled slowly, calm, collected. He took out his phone and made a single call. Nia, he said, speaking to his executive assistant. Activate the internal system, quietly. On the other end, Nia Foster replied, It's ready, sir. Say the word. James didn't say another word to the staff, not yet, but his eyes, those told a story. Behind the frustration, behind the pain, was a storm building. I promise you, James said evenly, his voice low but carrying. You'll regret every word you've said today. Linda scoffed. Threats won't get you a room. Zoe's small hand found his. Why don't they like us? She asked. Barely audible. Layla, now visibly upset, stepped out from behind the desk. This isn't right, she said out loud. He hasn't done anything wrong. Just then, Evan, the blogger, raised his phone. It's already on X, he said flatly. People are watching. Michael rolled his eyes and took James's card again. Let me make this easy, he said. He walked over to the employee safe, opened the drawer, and locked the card inside. We'll hold it until the authorities get here, he said. Fraud's a serious matter. From across the room, Evan looked down at the card's details he had caught on video earlier and read aloud. James Carter, Azure Hospitality Group. A murmur ran through the lobby. A few heads turned. One guest audibly gasped. James looked up, calm but deadly serious. You just locked away the black card of the man who owns this hotel. And from that moment forward, the clock started ticking, not on James, but on them. Sarah, arms crossed and a smug look plastered across her face, leaned over the counter and mocked. No VIP guests look like that, nodding toward James and Zoe as if they were a joke in a punchline. Come on, sir, she added sarcastically. You really thought we'd hand over a penthouse suite to someone dressed like you? Her words cut sharp, loud enough for half the lobby to hear. James didn't flinch, but Zoe, her cheeks still wet from earlier tears, clung to her father's arm, her voice breaking as she cried, Daddy, don't let them take us. I don't want to go. James's hand rested on her back as he shielded her with his body, still calm, but inside, something was breaking loose. Then Thomas Reed, the security guard, stepped forward, this time grabbing James's arm, not yanking, but firm enough to provoke. Sir, we're going to have to escort you out now. You're disturbing the peace. That line. Disturbing the peace. It echoed like an old wound James had heard too many times, in too many places, when his presence alone was treated as a threat. Let go, he said slowly, his voice like steel. Thomas held his ground. Then walk out with your own feet, he muttered. Zoe started crying harder, grabbing onto her dad's hand. The tension was drawing stares now. Other guests had stopped moving. The bellhop froze near the elevators. A couple clutching iced lattes whispered and pointed toward the front desk. He's not doing anything wrong, a voice called out. Layla, the intern concierge, standing off to the side, her voice shaking but loud. Their reservation is valid. I saw it on the screen before Linda cleared it. Michael turned to her, snapping. You need to learn when to stay quiet. Linda shot Layla a deadly glare but said nothing. Instead, she whispered something into Thomas's ear, whatever it was. He nodded and took another step forward. Evan Wright, the travel blogger still live streaming, raised his voice from the center of the lobby. This is what injustice looks like, he called out, pointing his phone straight at Thomas. Then Linda. They're kicking out a black father and daughter because they think he looks too poor to be rich. Evan's voice carried across the polished floor, catching the ears of several guests who were now watching intently, some filming on their own devices. He's not even raising his voice. One woman near the sofa said, "This feels wrong." Linda, clearly annoyed, barked, "We don't need commentary from strangers, sir." She snapped at James. "Leave before I call the police." Zoe looked up at her dad with wide eyes. "Daddy, what if they take you away?" she whispered. And that was the final push. James reached for his phone again. "Nia," he said clearly. "Escalate it." On the other end, Nia Foster, his executive assistant, responded immediately. "Already logging everything. Internal protocol is active. Just say the word when you want a full override." "Almost there," James murmured. His eyes stayed on Linda. "Keep digging," he said to her. "You're going to hit something you can't handle." Linda smirked, unfazed. "People like you always talk big." James stared at her. "And people like you always think they're safe, until the truth shows up." Sarah, still perched behind the desk, rolled her eyes dramatically and muttered. "Troublemakers never know when to quit," Evan shouted over her. "It's on Reddit now, too. 30,000 views and counting." Linda froze for a half second before composing herself. She turned to Michael and hissed, "Say it's fraud. If anyone asks, tell them he forged that card. The little girl's not even registered. Say whatever you have to say." Michael nodded, visibly nervous now, but didn't look James in the eye. Layla, trembling, took a step closer toward James and Zoe. "Sir, I believe you," she said quietly. "And I don't want to work for people like this." Zoe looked up at her, sniffled, and whispered, "Thank you." Then Layla turned to Linda and said out loud, "You ignored complaints. I've seen the logs. People told you this was happening." That stopped the room cold. Linda turned slowly. "You want to be fired?" she asked Layla. "You don't scare me," Layla replied, and for the first time, her voice didn't shake. James looked down at Zoe and then out at the guests now watching, some shocked, some quiet, all witnessing the same ugly thing unfold. "I've spent my whole life proving people like this wrong," James said, voice firm but not angry. "But I never thought I'd have to do it like this, in front of my own daughter." His words struck something in the room. A man near the elevators lowered his phone. A woman at the coffee bar looked down, visibly uncomfortable. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was heavy. Michael finally spoke, his voice uneven. Maybe we should let them explain." But Linda cut him off. "No, we do not serve pretenders." "Pretenders?" James repeated. He stepped forward slowly. "You're pretending this isn't racism in real time." Evan looked directly into his phone and said, "If anyone out there still thinks this kind of thing doesn't happen, rewind the last 5 minutes. You're watching it now." Linda waved at Thomas again, more urgently. "Remove them!" she barked. Thomas hesitated this time, just slightly, but it was enough for a shift to happen. James turned to Zoe, bent down beside her. "It's going to be okay," he whispered. "They just don't know who we are yet." Zoe nodded, wiped her tears, and whispered, "You're strong. Daddy." James stood back up, squared his shoulders, and looked Linda dead in the eyes. "You just made this lobby a courtroom," he said. "And I've brought the receipts." Linda stared at him, confused, defiant, but around her, things were starting to crack. Layla stepped beside James. Evan stopped live streaming and began quietly uploading clips to his feed, and at least a dozen guests began murmuring about the posts. The truth was spreading, and fast. Linda's voice cut across the lobby like a knife. "Thomas, I said remove them. Now." Her tone was no longer smug. It was sharp, panicked, cracking under pressure. But Thomas hesitated again, eyes darting between James, Zoe, the growing circle of guests, and Evan's phone still glowing with a recording icon. The moment was slipping out of their control, and Linda knew it. She stormed around the counter and stabbed her finger toward the exit. "You and your daughter need to leave this property before I call the police and report you both for fraud and trespassing." That was the trigger. Guests nearby stopped pretending to ignore what was happening. One older couple stood up from a leather couch by the window. A man in a business jacket stepped forward. Another guest pulled out his phone. Sarah, still behind the desk, grabbed the hotel's intercom mic and, with a twisted grin, pressed the button and let her voice ring out across the tiled floor. "Attention staff and security, code black at the front desk. Repeat, code black." James's head snapped around. "What did you just say?" Sarah pretended innocence. "It's a standard term, protocol." But everyone in the lobby heard it for what it was, racially coded. James's jaw locked. Zoe clutched his waist, frightened, confused, trembling. "Daddy," she said softly, "why do they keep calling us that?" Her voice cracked as she looked up at him, her small hand gripping his shirt like it was her only lifeline. James bent down and hugged her tightly, shielding her from the stares, the whispers, the humiliation. But his voice, low and deliberate, cut through it all. "They think they're in charge. They've forgotten who really signs the paychecks here." Then, just as Thomas made another hesitant move toward them, Evan Wright stepped forward. "No," he said firmly. "You're not putting hands on him." And suddenly, the crowd shifted, one by one. Guests began to physically move, stepping between James and the security guard. A woman in a red sundress stood in front of Zoe, arms crossed. A young man with a briefcase stepped beside James, glaring at Thomas. Another older gentleman quietly muttered, "This is disgusting," and stood behind Layla, who hadn't moved from James's side. Linda blinked, stunned, then shouted, "Get back! You're interfering with security protocol!" Evan held up his phone again. "No, we're stopping abuse. This isn't a protocol. It's profiling, and now the whole internet's watching." Thomas turned toward Linda. "You said they were trespassers," he said, more uncertain now. "That they had no reservation." Layla, voice shaking but clear, said, "I saw their name on the VIP list this morning. She had it removed before they arrived." Linda whipped around, eyes narrowing. "You lying little intern." "I'm not lying," Layla shot back. "You knew he was coming, and you wanted to embarrass him. That's why you cleared the reservation and locked his card." James rose to full height again. "That's the final mistake," he said. "You don't get to erase me in a building I built." Linda folded her arms, defiant. "You've got no proof." James raised his phone. "Actually, I do. Every word you've said is recorded, and in case you've forgotten, I helped design the surveillance systems in this lobby." Michael, pale now, looked around. I just did what she told me," he mumbled. "She said he was faking everything." Layla turned toward him, eyes sharp. "You threw his card on the floor. Michael, that was your choice." Guests were murmuring louder now, some shaking their heads, some openly angry. Zoe, still holding on to her dad's hand, whispered, "Are we going to be okay?" James looked down at her, voice steady. "We already are, baby. We already are." That's when Linda snapped, "I want them out. I don't care what anyone says. He's lying. He's a scammer. You're all being played." Her voice echoed across the lobby, and for the first time, no one believed her. Not anymore. The guests formed a solid barrier, shoulder to shoulder, quietly, like a line in the sand. Even Thomas stepped back, folding his arms, unsure. "This is spiraling," he muttered under his breath. Evan looked directly at James. "Tell us what you want us to do." James stood silent for a moment, the weight of his daughter's hand in his and dozens of eyes watching. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point. But the storm behind his eyes was unmistakable. "Just wait," he said. "They'll know soon enough." At that moment, Naya's voice rang through his phone, calm and composed. "System override is ready. All personnel changes standing by. Robert is en route. 2 minutes." James didn't blink. He didn't flinch. But the slightest nod gave everything away. Layla glanced up at him. "You're really—" "Yes," he said, still watching Linda as she fumed behind the desk. "I'm not just checking in. I own the building." Murmurs spread like wildfire. One woman gasped. A man muttered, "You've got to be kidding me." Linda stared at him, the color draining from her face. "You're James Carter?" she asked, but it was more of a whisper. James didn't answer. He just looked at Zoe and said, "Ready to fix this?" She nodded slowly, wiping her cheeks. "Yeah." Then she whispered, "Can we stay in the room with the balcony?" A smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Absolutely." Behind them. Evan's phone buzzed again, comments pouring in, clips reposted, the phrase "racism at Azure Haven" now traveling faster than anyone could contain. The staff had tried to humiliate him, tried to intimidate his daughter, tried to strip away his dignity, but instead, they had lit the match that would expose them all. And now, the reckoning was just seconds away. Thomas Reed wasn't used to hesitation. His job, after all, was to remove problems, not question orders. But as he stood there staring at the silent wall of guests between himself and the man he was told to drag out, something shifted in his posture. Not fear, not defiance, doubt. "This is a lawful order," Linda barked at him, her voice sharper than ever, now shrill with panic. "They don't belong here. And your security. Do your job." But Thomas didn't move. He looked past Linda, looked at James and Zoe. Zoe, small and quiet, red-faced from crying, gripping her dad's hand with that mix of fear and belief only a child could hold. He looked at James's shoulders, broad, still, bearing the weight of his daughter, of this lobby, of everything. "Move them!" Linda yelled again, and that was when the guests moved first. Not one, not two, but 5, 6. Then 8 people stepped forward. Evan was already filming again, narrating into the mic. "This is no longer a standoff. It's a turning point." The man with the business coat moved squarely in front of Thomas and shook his head. "You're not laying a finger on that man or his daughter," a woman in a white blouse said. "I've never seen anything like this, and I'm not about to be part of it." Another guest, an older black woman with a cane, made her way to James's side, placing a firm hand on his back. "I've stayed in 100 hotels," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "But I've never stayed in one owned by someone with this kind of grace under fire." Linda was fuming now, her voice cracking under the strain. "All of you need to back off or you'll be escorted out, too." "By who?" someone shouted back. "You fired decency the second you threw his card on the floor." The crowd murmured louder now. Voices began overlapping. Zoe clutched her father's hand but looked around with new eyes. These people weren't mocking her. They were protecting her. She looked up at James and whispered, "They're helping us. Daddy." He nodded slowly, never taking his eyes off Linda. Just then, a voice came through his phone, Nia again, calm, sharp, steady. "Robert is in the building. ETA, less than 60 seconds. All personnel shifts logged. System ready." James closed his eyes for a breath. "Copy that." "Do it," Nia said. "She's crossed the line." At that very moment, Linda turned and tried to shut down the terminal. But Layla beat her to it, the intern, who had watched, endured, and held her tongue for too long. Now stepped behind the desk and blocked Linda with both arms. "This ends now," Layla said, voice trembling, but unwavering. "You don't get to bury this under policy." Linda stared her down. "You think you can stop me? You're an intern." Layla stood tall. "Not for long." Michael Chen, the second clerk, now visibly sweating, slowly backed away from the desk. "I didn't know," he mumbled. "I didn't know he was." James cut him off. "You didn't care. That's worse." Michael sat down, saying nothing more. Linda turned back to the crowd and shouted, "This is still my lobby! Until someone says otherwise, I'm still the manager here!" Just as those words left her mouth, the elevator behind the front desk opened. Robert Klein, CEO of the Azure Haven branch, stepped out, flanked by Diane Foster and Charles Vaughn, two senior board members of the Azure Hospitality Group, dressed in formal attire, clipboards in hand, expressions carved from stone. Linda froze. Everyone did. Robert didn't look at her. He didn't glance at Thomas or Sarah or Michael. He walked straight to James, extended a hand, and said, "Sir, we've arrived. Authority is yours." James nodded once. "Thank you. Let's begin." The air in the lobby went dead silent. Diane stepped forward. Effective immediately, Linda Harper, Michael Chen, Sarah Brooks, and Thomas Reed are relieved of duty. Linda's jaw dropped. "What?" she stammered. You can't just fire me like this." "Actually," Charles said, flipping a document over, "we can, and we are." Sarah tried to step back, stuttering. I was just doing what she said." "You mocked a child," Diane replied, not even raising her voice. "You're done." Linda tried one last desperate tactic, pointing at Evan's phone. "He recorded all this. That's illegal." Evan didn't flinch. "Not in a public lobby, and I'm not the only one." Half a dozen phones were raised around the room, footage already posted, clips already spreading. This wasn't just a scandal now. It was a corporate emergency. James took a step forward. His voice was calm, but powerful. "Every second you spent disrespecting me, you forgot who I am. Not just a guest, not just a man. I'm your boss, the founder of this entire hotel group. And I came here today for one reason. Because I heard stories. Because I wanted to believe they weren't true. But you proved they were." Zoe stepped forward beside him, small but steady. She looked up at Linda and said softly, "My daddy didn't do anything wrong." That simple sentence, from that little girl, hit harder than any speech ever could. Linda opened her mouth to argue, but for the first time all day, she said nothing. And for the first time all day, Zoe wasn't crying anymore, for a moment. The lobby was still. So still it was as if the marble floor itself was holding its breath. Linda's lips parted, but no words came out. The smugness had drained from her face completely, replaced by a paleness that reached down into her chest. Behind her, Sarah stared straight ahead, blinking rapidly, while Michael looked down at his shoes like a schoolboy waiting for detention. Thomas stood with arms folded, no longer so sure where he stood in the chain of command, and right in the middle of it all. James Carter adjusted the sleeve of his plain white t-shirt, stepped forward onto the polished floor of his own hotel, and said in a voice that didn't need to rise, "Let me make it plain for everyone in this room." He turned slowly, eyes scanning across the crowd, guests, staff, onlookers, cameras still raised. "My name is James Carter, and I am the CEO of Azure Hospitality Group. That means I own this hotel, every tile, every desk, every policy, and every one of you standing behind that front counter." Gasps rippled across the lobby. A woman in heels audibly said, "Oh my God," while another guest clapped a hand over her mouth. Robert Klein stepped beside James and gave a formal nod. He's not exaggerating. He signs our paychecks. Diane Foster moved next to Robert, clipboard in hand, and declared, "Effective immediately. We are executing a complete staffing replacement per the CEO's directive." Charles Vaughn, stone-faced and silent until now, stepped forward and quietly handed Linda a white envelope. "You're terminated?" Linda shook her head slowly, stunned. You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm beyond serious," James replied, eyes locked on her. "You insulted my daughter. You called me a liar. You threw my card on the floor. You locked it in a safe. And you conspired to remove me from my own building while coaching your staff to lie." Michael started to protest. I didn't mean—" "Michael," James said sharply, "you didn't just go along with it. You escalated it. You mocked my daughter. You locked up my card without checking a thing. You humiliated us in public. For that, you are not only terminated, you are banned from future employment at any Azure Hospitality property. Permanently." Michael went pale. "Please," he whispered. "I have a family." James looked at him. "So do I." Then his eyes shifted to Sarah, who had not yet spoken. "You got anything to add?" he asked. She looked up, startled. Her mouth opened, closed. Then, slowly, she stepped out from behind the desk. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes," she said. "I do." The room quieted again. Evan held his phone up higher, ready to catch every word. Sarah looked at James, then at Zoe, her eyes softening for the first time all day. "This wasn't the first time," she said quietly. "Linda, she's done this before. Told us to cancel bookings when certain people walked in. Black families, Latino couples. I didn't say anything. And I should have. I'm sorry." The confession hung in the air like fog. James didn't respond right away. Behind him, Diane folded her arms. "That aligns with prior complaints from guests and a flagged employee review last quarter," she said. Turning to Robert, "This is bigger than just today." James nodded slowly, still watching Sarah. "And you let it happen?" "Yes," she said, voice trembling. "But I won't again." "You're still terminated," James said. "But your honesty is noted. I hope you carry that forward into whatever comes next." Sarah nodded, defeated but strangely lighter. She stepped back into the crowd. Linda, however, wasn't ready to let go. "I built this staff," she snapped. "I trained this team, and this is how you repay me?" "You trained them," James said coldly, "to fear difference, to profile people. You didn't build anything. You poisoned it." Linda sneered. "You're only doing this for the cameras. To look good, you'll move on and nothing will change." James stepped forward again. "You really think I'd waste my time just looking good?" His voice sharpened. "I came here to investigate rumors of bias, and you gave me a full demonstration. So no, I'm not just firing you. I'm announcing today the beginning of a complete reform across every branch of Azure Hospitality." More murmurs swept the lobby. "Effective today," James continued. "We are launching a review process across all locations. Starting with this one, discrimination reports will be elevated directly to the board. Independent monitors will be installed in complaint handling departments. Training modules will be replaced by a human-led bias response team. And most importantly," he turned to Layla, "those who speak up will be rewarded, not punished." He walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Layla Morgan, you are no longer an intern. As of this moment, you are promoted to guest relations lead of this property." Layla gasped. Her hands flew to her face, tears immediately welling up. "Sir, thank you. I don't know what to say." "Say it by how you lead," James replied. The crowd clapped, not loud, not staged. Real applause from people who had just seen something rare, something just. Robert turned to James. "Anything else?" James nodded. Yes, I want a statement sent out to the press. And I want it clear. Azure is changing. Not because we got caught, but because we got convicted by the truth. Diane made a note. It'll be on wire services by tonight, Charles added. We'll brief all GMs by morning. Just then, Zoe tugged her dad's hand. Can we go upstairs now? She whispered. James smiled, the first full smile since he entered the building. Almost. Baby girl, one more thing. He turned to face the guests, those who had stood up, spoken out, filmed, protected. To all of you, thank you. For standing with me, for standing with my daughter. You reminded me that justice still lives in the small moments, when good people say, "Not today." A few people clapped again. Someone near the back called out, "You raised her right?" Zoe beamed. Linda, now ghost pale, clutched the envelope in her hands but didn't move. She had nothing left to say, nothing left to hide behind. And as she turned to walk out, no power, no staff, no title, she passed the very girl she tried to erase. And Zoe didn't flinch. She just held her father's hand and stood tall. The lobby no longer felt like a hotel. It felt like a courtroom in session, and James Carter was now both witness and judge. But instead of a gavel, he used action. No raised voice, no grandstanding, just precise decisions delivered with the calm of a man who had waited his entire career for a moment like this. Effective immediately, he said. We are halting all front desk operations until a new team is fully briefed and retrained. Layla, you'll coordinate guest service continuity. Diane, Charles, begin onboarding replacements by end of day. Nia, connect us with HR at corporate and legal. Every terminated employee is to be documented and released with formal cause. Behind him, Diane was already typing. Charles nodded sharply. Robert issued 3 brief commands into his earpiece. And just like that, the entire floor moved. Staff filtered in from the back, quietly escorting guests toward temporary check-in stations. New team members arrived from a partner property 2 blocks away. It was coordinated, efficient, like watching a company repair itself in real time. But James knew this moment was bigger than just logistics. This was about precedent. The people watching, both in the lobby and now online, needed to see that consequences were real, that systems could be corrected when power refused to protect the wrong people. A ripple of chatter passed through the room as Evan Wright posted the latest video update. Staff replaced at Azure Haven after racism scandal. CEO acts on site. Within minutes, that phrase was trending quietly, even without hashtags. They're picking it up, Nia said over the phone. Several outlets just reached out. No statements yet. They'll have one soon, James replied. He looked around and noticed Zoe sitting calmly on a nearby sofa. Sipping juice one of the new concierges had handed her. Her shoulders weren't hunched anymore. Her knees weren't drawn up. For the first time since entering the hotel, she looked like a child again. James exhaled. Slow, deep, deliberate. Then he turned toward Layla and asked, "Any guest reports that were ignored?" Layla paused. "Yes. Actually, 2 months ago, a black couple filed a written complaint, said their reservation was mysteriously missing when they arrived. They were sent to a cheaper partner hotel across town. The report was buried." "Who buried it?" James asked. Layla hesitated. "Michael. He signed off on it. Linda ordered it." James turned to Robert. "Pull every complaint filed in the past 12 months flagged as reservation error or guest mismatch. Compare the names against demographic data. I want a full report by tomorrow." Robert nodded. "You got it." "Also," James added, "suspend every current staff member listed as having altered booking records under Linda's leadership." Diane was already on her second page of notes. And that's when the massive twist dropped. So casually it almost didn't land right away. Sarah, now sitting on a bench near the hallway, looked up and said, There's something else. All heads turned. James nodded. Go ahead. Sarah took a breath. Linda and Michael. They used to talk about it like a game. They'd joke about how many guests they could push out without getting caught. They had a word for it. Filter days. It meant canceling bookings that didn't fit the right aesthetic. Usually people of color. I overheard them more than once, but I stayed quiet. I was afraid of losing my job. The words landed like bricks. Layla's hand flew to her mouth. Diane slowly looked up. Did they document these filters? Yes, Sarah said. They kept a shared folder in the admin system labeled guest security tags. But it wasn't about safety. It was code, color-coded entries. Blue meant let through. Red meant redirect. I only saw it once before Linda locked access. James turned to Nia on the phone. You get all that? Already pulling archived admin logs. Nia said, if we find that folder, it's a systemic discrimination pattern. Legal will want to move fast. Good, James replied. He looked over at Sarah. Thank you. It doesn't undo what you did, but it helps shine a light. Sarah nodded, quiet. The tension in the room was heavier now, more serious. This wasn't just a case of a bad check-in experience or one rogue employee. It was a coordinated pattern of gatekeeping, one that had operated beneath the surface of luxury and hospitality. James straightened his posture and addressed the lobby. This hotel and this brand belong to every guest who walks through those doors. We're not in the business of judging who looks like they belong. We're in the business of making people feel welcome, safe, and seen. That starts now. As he finished, a small voice from the side spoke up. Daddy? It was Zoe, standing again, juice cup empty. Can we stay tonight? Like we planned? James smiled. We're not just staying. We're reclaiming what's ours. And with that, the hotel, his hotel, finally felt like it belonged to everyone again. The lobby had changed, not just in appearance, but in spirit. It no longer echoed with accusations, threats, or the stifling silence of judgment. Instead, it hummed with quiet activity, new staff assisting guests, Layla confidently checking her clipboard, Diane and Charles in conversation with Robert about system-wide changes. And at the heart of it all stood James Carter, no longer just a father defending his daughter, but a leader reshaping an industry in real time, within hours. The first official company-wide reform directive was issued from Azure Hospitality's headquarters. Every hotel in the chain received notice, immediate review of past discrimination complaints, restructuring of guest intake procedures, and the formation of a third-party bias monitoring committee. But even as the structural reform rolled forward, the emotional reality still hung in the air. Guests who had watched the incident unfold lingered to shake James's hand. One older gentleman, his eyes glassy, simply said, "Thank you for doing what so many of us never could." A mother with 2 teenagers pulled James aside, whispering, "My son needed to see this. He needed to know someone like him could fight back and win." Zoe stood nearby, now wearing a guest badge that Layla had given her, proudly showing it to anyone who asked. Her eyes no longer held fear, just pride. James took it all in with quiet humility. "This isn't about one man," he said to a small group of reporters gathering outside the lobby doors. "This is about the system we let grow in the shadows, a system that pretends it's about luxury, but sometimes serves exclusion. That ends now." As cameras clicked, Diane added, "The guests today witnessed more than a crisis. They witnessed a course correction, from the top down." But even as the resolution settled over the hotel, the final twist came from an unexpected voice, a former regional manager, tuned in via live stream, who posted a confession on her public professional page. "I was told not to interfere," she wrote. "Linda's methods were known. When we tried to raise concerns, we were quietly told, "She gets results. Let her manage her floor." Now I regret every time I looked away. That revelation hit harder than any footage could. It confirmed what many had suspected. This wasn't an isolated case. It had been tolerated from the top. Within 24 hours, the Azure board announced an investigation into regional leadership. Several resignations followed. And James, now at the center of a national conversation, didn't retreat. He leaned in. In the days that followed, he took to national television and podcast interviews, not to boast, but to educate. "What happened at Azure Haven isn't unique," he said calmly on one broadcast. "It's just one of the few times someone in power happened to be standing in the lobby when it happened." 3 months later, that moment in Miami had turned into something larger. James and Zoe launched the Haven Initiative, a diversity and accountability nonprofit aimed at helping other hospitality companies audit and reform their guest policies. Layla now served as its founding director of outreach, traveling to colleges to speak with young professionals about courage in the face of bias. Azure Haven itself underwent a full redesign, not physically, but philosophically. Guest feedback stations were installed, internal equity audits became quarterly mandates. And Zoe's name? It now quietly lived on the wall of the penthouse suite they stayed in that night. Engraved on a small brass plate near the entrance, the Zoe Carter Suite, in honor of every child who deserved to feel safe. When James was asked later what that day meant to him, he paused for a long moment before answering. "I've had contracts worth billions. I've sat across from presidents and board chairs, but the most important thing I've ever done happened in a lobby while holding my daughter's hand." Then, he added, "Power doesn't mean anything if it's not used to protect the vulnerable." And so, to those watching this story unfold, to those who've ever been dismissed, ignored, or judged based on how they looked, what they wore, or where they came from, James and Zoe offer this message. You don't have to raise your voice to be heard. You just have to stand long enough and steady enough to remind the world who you really are.